That is good. So,
Marital issue as well, ma.
exactly. Poverty, we handle poverty. Child welfare issues.
Okay.
Child welfare issues. As we
Woman
mentioned,
trafficking,
woman trafficking, domestic violence.
domestic
What
violence,
about health
job creation,
disparity issues?
substance
Mhm.
use disorder.
Okay,
Sexual abuse. Sexual abuse. Ma.
okay. And finally, we normally handle community development issues. Do we do
Yes,
that?
community development. Yes,
Community development issues. So, data collection methods, therefore, must be tailored to capture the lived experiences of individuals or the lived experiences of communities while maintaining scientific rigor. And these methods can be broadly categorized into two, or if I may use the word, into three. One is quantitative data collection method. The second one is qualitative
qualitative.
data collection method. And when you decide to use the two, making it the third one, we refer to it as mixed method approach.
Yeah,
And each of them will always have their distinctive tools and procedures. So what do I mean when I say lived experience or lived experiences of individuals and communities? Lived experiences of individuals. What do I mean by that? When we say the concept known as lived experiences, what is it? It's a concept, lived experiences.
that is the we must not we must consider every issue, every problem happening to a person, individual, or a community. The list of it from the start to the from the minimum to the maximum. The list of it must be considered as a social worker when we are doing our data collection.
Okay. So simply put, the concept lived experiences refers to the personal, subjective accounts of people's life. Subjective. What is the opposite of subjective? What is the opposite of subjective?
Objective.
Objective, okay. Subjective means that it lies with the individual. It cannot be generalized. It is not an issue that you can generalize on every individual. Whatever the individual says remains with him. The person is saying whatever he's saying out of his own experience, which some other person may not be experiencing. So the term lived experiences refers to the personal, subjective accounts of people's life. That is how individuals or how communities experience, interpret, and give meanings to their everyday realities. How you as an individual will interpret what you face in your everyday life, or the meaning you will give to what you experience in your everyday life. So it goes beyond observational facts. It goes beyond statistics to capture the emotions, perceptions, or if I may use the word, the struggles that individuals go through and the social context that shape people's existence. So when I mean it goes beyond observational facts or statistics, if you say how many persons are being molested in the name of domestic violence, you can just get the statistic, maybe 10 persons in a year, but you do not know their emotional feelings. You cannot assess how they see that violence and how they have been able to adapt with that violence issue. So all you just had was you were able to capture the statistics, the prevalence, but not an in-depth study which will tell you how the individual feels, how the individual sees that abuse, and how the individual is able to cope with the abuse. I'm using an example of domestic violence. So if I may simply put it, I said, lived experiences are what life feels like, and means to those actually going through it. What life feels like, somebody going through unemployment. How does he feel about it? Because he's the one going through it. Some other person may be going through unemployment and will not really see it as anything serious because the person's daily needs have been provided by another person. Or a woman undergoing domestic violence may be enjoying it, who might even be the one causing the violence in order to get the husband's attention or to get new things to wear, buy whatever thing she wants to buy, because it's when she's beaten that the husband will now beg and give her money to get what she wants. And that may not be the case of another person.
Sure.
So lived experiences are what life feels like, and means to those actually going through it. So the key features of lived experience is one, it is a subjective reality. It has to do with the individual. It cannot be generalized. And
Okay.
therefore, it focuses on how people perceive and interpret their events rather than how outsiders define them. So, for example, two survivors of domestic violence may report different lived experiences. True or false? Two survivors of domestic violence may report different lived experiences. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, one may focus on fear, while another will emphasize resilience.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So when they report their issues, one will talk on shame, fear, while the other person can be reporting and say, look, these are the things I'm doing to sustain, to be able to live with this violence. And therefore, it means that one of the key features of lived experience is subjective reality. I'm emphasizing on this because it will enable you to know which of the data collection method will be ideal for the study you want to choose to study. Another key features of lived experience is contextual understanding of it. Experiences are embedded in cultural, social, and economic contexts. Experiences, they are embedded in culture, to be embedded in social, and could also be embedded in economic context. For example, the lived experience of unemployment in Nigeria may differ greatly from that in the United Kingdom due to the different support systems. Am I correct? The lived experience of unemployment in Nigeria. You don't expect that experience to be the same with somebody who is unemployed in UK.
Yes,
Because
ma.
in UK, you will have a support system. But in Nigeria, is there any support system for our unemployed youths or an unemployed adults?
No, ma.
And so their lived experiences will be different. And so it requires you to have an understanding of where that experience is going on. And that I call contextual understanding.
Okay.
Another key feature again is the voices of the participants. The voices of the participants, which emphasizes giving voice to individuals and communities, especially marginalized or vulnerable groups. One of the key features of these lived experiences has to do with what? Voices of the participants. That is where we emphasize giving voice to individuals and or communities. And when we talk about giving voice to individuals or communities, of course, in social work, our concern is always on marginalized or vulnerable groups. True or false?
Oh, ma.
Okay. For example, street children, describing how they navigate survival in urban spaces. And then we have the holistic insights. One of the key features of lived experience is that it gives us a holistic insight because it goes beyond numbers to capture feelings. Lived experiences goes beyond numbers to capture feelings, capture hopes, capture coping strategies, and even struggles. For example, instead of just knowing how many children work in markets, lived experience will do what? We reveal why they work. Why they work? Why do they work? How do they feel about the work they do? And what it means for their future. So through engaging them in discussion, in interviews, they will be able to reveal, tell you why they work and how they feel about the work they're doing. And you can even go further to ask them what they think about their future with this work they do. And they will tell you. So in social work research, lived experiences are central because social work focuses on what? Human dignity. Social work focuses on human dignity, focuses on empowerment. It also tries to have an understanding of social problems from the client's perspective. We are always interested in having understanding of social problems from our client's perspective, not from the general perspective, not from outsiders' perspective, not from even the researcher's perspective. So you could be looking at a social problem from your own perspective, but by the time you engage your client, you discover that his entire perspective is different from your own. So lived experiences become central because it gives us an understanding of social problems from our client's perspective. And they help us researchers and even practitioners see the world through the eyes of those that are affected. Social workers who do not believe in numbers will believe in having contact with people that are affected. If you say, oh, you're looking at poverty, who are the people that are poor? from your interaction with them, you know whether they're actually poor or not poor. And that will enable you to come up with a program that will help their situation. Is it in a case of child welfare, juvenile delinquencies, substance abuse? You look at them, you see the world through the eyes of those that are what? Affected, making interventions more relevant and culturally sensitive. If we don't do that, our interventions will not be relevant. So I try to come up with like a situation where you have women coping with domestic violence in communities where men are dominating. Families displaced by flood and their struggles to rebuild livelihood. They all have their different lived experiences. Children in foster care, navigating identity and belonging. So lived experiences are what? Central to every social work practitioner and researcher. And so why does it matter? Why do we have to consider the lived experiences of our clients? Remember the definition of it, that lived experiences refer to personal, not general, personal subjective accounts of a person's life. That is how the person or how the individual or community experience, interpret, and give meaning to their everyday reality. So why does it matter? One, it helps us in policy development, that is policy relevance. Lived experience inform policymakers about the reality behind statistics. About the reality behind what? Statistics. So you can get, in a year, you can get a statistic that tells you that the prevalence of domestic violence is 60% in a year. That is just a number. But if you want to know more about it, what they experience, what they perceive as violence, how they manage that violence, you go further to look at their lived experience. So lived experiences inform policymakers about the realities behind statistics. And it also helps us social workers tailor our interventions that resonate with client's needs, our interventions that suit the client's need. So your intervention will not just be haphazard intervention, providing what the clients do not need. And of course, there is academic relevance to it because it provides depth and richness to our social research, complementing quantitative evidence, complementing quantitative evidence. So in summary, I would say that lived experience of individuals represent their personal or subjective realities. And so in social work research, there is need to capture lived experiences to ensure that our interventions and our policies are grounded in the voices and the realities of those that are directly affected. And that takes us to the two different categories of data collection methods. Having known what lived experience is, we now go to quantitative data collection method. Your program is DSW, right? Am I correct?
Yes,
Doctor in
ma'am.
social work practice.
Yes, ma'am.
So meaning that
Yes, ma'am.
you know what quantitative data collection is. You must have written your student project, undergraduate, postgraduate, and now you're doing you're into the program of doctor in social work practice. So all I'm going to say will not be new. They will not be strange to you. That is why I spend time to explain what I mean by lived experience, because that may be new. Maybe coming across it, but not really understanding what it is. But this quantitative data collection cannot be new to you. So quantitative data collection methods are systematic techniques that we use to gather numerical information that can be measured, that can be counted, and statistically analyzed. So in our social work research, these methods are designed to capture objective data about the social problems we handle, such as behavior, attitude, demographic characteristics, service utilization, or program outcomes. So we rely on standardized instruments such as surveys, questionnaires, structured interviews, and even structured observational lists that can provide data in numerical form. So quantitative data collection will always emphasize objectivity, reliability, and at the same time, generalizability of our findings, making it suitable for studies that aim to test hypotheses. Studies that aim to test hypotheses, studies that aim to examine relationships between variables, studies that aim to compare groups or predict outcomes. That is where we use quantitative data collection approach, where we want to carry out suitable studies that will aim at testing hypotheses, examining relationship between variables. Remember when we discussed variables, dependent and independent variable, intervening variable, and the rest of them. Or when we want to compare groups or predict outcomes, we use quantitative data collection method. For example, I like giving you examples so that it will be cracking your brain and be thinking of the topic you are going to work on. A social work researcher, that is you and I, might use a quantitative quantitative method using a questionnaire with Likert scale items to measure the level of job satisfaction among social workers in child welfare agencies, or use agency records to analyze the number of domestic violence cases that are being reported in a community over time. So when you want to get this number, That is level of job satisfaction among social workers that are working in child welfare agencies, or you want to get records that you will analyze from agency records, where records are kept, and then you can know the number of domestic violence cases that are reported in a community over time. You will use quantitative data collection method. So quantitative data collection method is just a research technique that will provide numerical data, allowing you, the social work researcher, to apply statistical analysis to understand the patterns, the trends, and the relationship within populations. And then we come to qualitative, which I believe you know, qualitative data collection methods. Qualitative data collection methods, there are also research techniques that we use to gather, this time not numerical data, but non-numerical, descriptive, and an in-depth information about people's experiences, about people's perception about an issue, about people's beliefs, and also the social context. So instead of focusing on numbers, which you have in quantitative data collection, instead of focusing on numbers, qualitative will emphasize meanings, processes, and interpretation of social phenomena. So in our social work research, qualitative method will always aim to explore the lived experiences of individuals or the lived experiences of communities, thereby providing insights into complex issues, which we have mentioned earlier, lived experiences of individuals into their complex issues that have to do with either domestic violence, poverty, discrimination, or coping strategies. So they rely on flexible and open-ended tools. We rely on flexible and open-ended tools such as in-depth interviews, not structured interviews, in-depth interviews. Question will lead to another question. As the client answers you, you go further, you probe further. Tools such as in-depth interviews, tools such as focus group discussions, because there you'll be discussing and you'll be asking questions. One question will lead to the other, and you see the people airing out their views about an issue that's under discussion. And so it's always flexible and open-ended tools, such as participant observation, case studies, and all that. So that makes it different from quantitative. So these methods allow participants to express themselves. Qualitative will always allow participants to express themselves when you engage them in in-depth interviews or when you engage them in focus group discussions. It allows them to express themselves in their own words, And that enables you to capture, have a rich understanding of what they go through. And that data will always reveal how people make sense of their lives, how they make sense of their lives and how they make sense of their social realities. So qualitative data collection methods focus on collecting detailed, descriptive information that helps researchers understand why and how people think, people feel, and people act, rather than what they do. So one of the key features of qualitative is that the data we collect is always verbal information or visual rather than numerical. We emphasize on in-depth meanings and context. And of course, it's always flexible, open-ended, and exploratory. When you use quantitative, you will not be able to explore. But when you use qualitative to gather data from your clients, you have opportunity to explore. And then it's commonly used, qualitative is commonly used when studying sensitive social issues, when studying complex social issues or underexplored social issues. That is where we use qualitative. Now, in case of HIV, it's a sensitive issue. Domestic violence is a sensitive issue. People may not be out to tell you all that they experience, what they feel about their condition, if you should use quantitative. But when you use qualitative, you can engage them in an in-depth interview. And if you're able to have a good number of them, you engage them in a focus group discussion. And then they discuss with you how they feel about the social issue they are going through. So the question is, what are the significant differences between quantitative and qualitative data methods? When it comes to the nature of data. Hello, are you with me?
Ma.
Hello.
Yes, ma. And we are with
Okay.
you, ma.
All right, beautiful. So I'm asking, what are the significant differences between quantitative and qualitative data collection methods? And I start with the nature of the data you want to collect. Nature of data. In quantitative data collection method, the nature of the data is what? Numerical, numbers. And the data can be measurable. And you can count, it's countable data. And that is why we can always say percentage, frequencies, or scales. Oh, 20% of persons said yes. 71% said no. That is number. And of course, it's the number of the frequency that we convert to percentage. I hope you know that. But in the area of qualitative, the nature of the data is what? Descriptive. It is non-numerical. The data is non-numerical data. Descriptive meaning the words of the clients. Narratives. You are narrating. Observations. You fell. Sorry. And then another significant difference is in the area, is an aspect of purpose. So you ask yourself, this study I want to carry out, what is the purpose of this study? So under purpose, you have to measure. If your purpose is just to measure, to test hypotheses and identify patterns, identify the relationship between the variables, then you go on with quantitative data collection method. But if the purpose of your study is to explore meanings, then she will explore meanings, experiences, getting the experiences of this, your clients, their perspectives, you use qualitative. So the purpose of your study, the objective of your study will determine which of the methods you are going to use. So no method is better than the other. It has to do with you, the researcher. So if the purpose of your study, the objective of your study is to measure, to test hypotheses, and probably identify patterns of these social events, and maybe the correlations between these events, how dependent variable depends on the interdependent variable and all that to give you an answer, then you go quantitative. But if it is to explore the lived experiences of these individuals that you are studying, and then you go qualitative, because that is where you will engage them in an in-depth interview. And if you're able to get a good number of them, probably 10 to 12 of them, or 8, you can engage them in focus group discussion. And then another aspect is research approach. If your research approach is the deductive type, that is where you test existing theories or existing theories or hypotheses, then you use quantitative. You can never do qualitative, engage in qualitative data collection and you state hypothesis. I hope you are getting me.
Yes, ma.
So you can't use qualitative, and because you see others stating hypothesis, you go ahead to state hypothesis. It means you did not understand this lecture I'm teaching. So if your research approach is to test existing theories or hypotheses, then you go quantitative. In that case, you say it's a deductive research approach. But if you are carrying out inductive, that is generating theories from data, then you go qualitative. And then another aspect is data collection tools. You have come up with a topic, a title that you want to work on, a study that you have discovered and you want to work on it. And you ask yourself, what are the data tools I'm going to use? If you are going to use questionnaires, structured interviews, standard tests, structured observations, secondary database, or data sets, then you go quantitative. But if your data collection tools have to do with in-depth interviews, focus group discussion, participant observation, case studies, then you use qualitative data collection methods. And then another striking one, very important aspect is your sample size. Your sample size. I've seen so many students who have a very small sample size and they say they are doing quantitative, which is very, very wrong. Sample size in quantitative research study is usually large to ensure generalization of your findings and also statistical validity. But when you use qualitative, it's typically small. Typically small, your sample size will be small, purposively selected. Remember what we talked about, the different sampling technique, the two categories of sampling technique, probability and non-probability sampling technique. So when you use the non-probability sampling technique where you purposively select your respondents or your participants, your research subjects, you're likely going to use qualitative because your number is going to be typically small, purposively selected to capture rich and detailed insights. Then another aspect that will determine the method to use is analysis. Analysis, statistical methods, descriptive and inferential statistics. If you have to use statistics, you have to go quantitative because you can only statistically analyze numbers. You can't analyze words of people. So, but when it comes to qualitative, we don't do statistical analysis. Rather, what we do, we arrange the stories our clients have told us in thematic form, thematic content or narrative analysis. That is, and when we do that, we try to identify patterns of their analysis, patterns of their narratives, meanings, and also the themes. An aspect again that makes quantitative and qualitative different is in the area of what? Flexibility. Quantitative data collection method is highly structured and standardized. It's not flexible. But in the qualitative one, the significant difference is that in qualitative, it is flexible and adaptive. Questions may evolve, during your data collection. Question leading to questions that you didn't even think of asking, but based on the answers your client gives you, you generate more questions. So, and that makes that interaction flexible. But in quantitative, it is highly structured and standardized. In qualitative, it is flexible and adaptive. Questions may evolve during your data collection. And then what about the aspect of outcome? There is a difference, or there are differences there. For quantitative, the outcome, it produces generalization of findings and predictive models. But for qualitative, it produces deep, contextualized understanding of social issues. It's subjective and you cannot generalize. But then it produces a deep, contextualized understanding of that social issue you are studying. And so your role as a researcher now when you're using quantitative. Researcher's role is objective. You have to be objective. Detached observers, aiming to minimize influence on data, because you cannot influence that. You have prepared the questionnaire and you have sent it out and they just feel you cannot influence the person. But in qualitative data collection method, active participant or facilitator acknowledging subjectivity and interaction with participants. Your role there, you'll be active, definitely. You'll be active because as you're interviewing, you are asking, you are very active. Unlike the quantitative, where you just give her the questionnaire or structured list where you're ticking the list, you are not doing much. But for the qualitative, you are an active participant or an active facilitator. Imagine where you organize a focus group discussion. From the beginning of that discussion to the end of the discussion, you will be an active facilitator. True or false?
True, ma.
You will be an active
Yeah.
facilitator. You agree with me?
Yes.
Okay.
We ask
Okay.
questions over and over.
Okay, fine. So, in summary, I could say that quantitative methods are best. Quantitative methods are best when you need measurable evidence, when you need to generalize your findings, and then when you need to carry out a statistical analysis of your data, you go for quantitative methods of data collection. But for qualitative methods are best when you need deep insights into meanings and experiences of that social issue you are studying. So many, social work researchers combine both. That is what we do. Oftentimes, we combine both. That is, and when we combine both of them, quantitative and qualitative, we call it mixed method studies, just to capture the breadth and the depth of the social issue we are studying. And take, for example, now if let's take domestic violence as an example to illustrate how quantitative and qualitative data collection method, will complement each other. Now you're studying domestic violence. Your topic now, your study is on domestic violence. You can use both of them. You can use quantitative and qualitative approach. So when it comes to the quantitative now, you, the researcher, you may want to measure the prevalence or the pattern of domestic violence in a community. When you want to measure the prevalence and the patterns of domestic violence in the community, your data collection method will be quantitative. In this case, you will develop a structured questionnaires that you will distribute to a reasonable number of women across the urban and the rural areas. Remember, I told you that sample size in quantitative study is always high, large. It's always large. So, and you want to measure the prevalence and pattern of domestic violence in a community, you use quantitative method by developing a structured questionnaire that you will distribute to, let's say, 500 women across urban and rural areas. And then what should your questionnaire contain? Your questionnaire should have frequency of abuse, type of abuse. Is it physical? Is it emotional? Is it economic abuse? Number one, frequency of abuse. They are going to ask, how often are you being abused? Is it daily, weekly, monthly, yearly? You put all that down and the participant will tick. And then you say type of abuse. Under type of abuse, you put physical abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse. And then when you know that you cannot mention all of them, you will not say others. You put in brackets, specify. And then in that your questionnaire, you will have a demographic characteristics of the victims. Demographic characteristics of the victims. And you know what I mean by demographic characteristics of the victim. Sex, because some men have also been abused though.
Yes.
Sex will be there. Let them tick.
Age.
You surprise you that you will see that you have about 2, 3, or 10 persons ticking male. Age, educational level, religion, these are the most graphic characteristics of your victims. And then reporting behaviors. So at the end of the day, when you want to analyze that questionnaire, you can be seen where you see maybe probably 35% of respondents reported experiencing domestic violence. And maybe 60, I'm just using arbitrary figures. So, because we're talking about quantitative now, bringing in quantitative in studying domestic violence. And I say we want to use the two, combine the two, so that they will complement each other in our social work research. So when you now want to analyze the questionnaire, you say probably 35% of respondents reported experiencing domestic violence, physical violence, 60% is more common than emotional abuse of 40%. And then only 20% reported cases to the police due to fear of stigma. So you see, you have numbers. You can statistically analyze it because they are numerical. So it has a strength. The strength there is that it has provided you measurable statistics and identifies the scale of the problem. The scale of the problem, which will be useful for policy making and advocacy. But it also has this pitfall in the area of limitation. This information is limited because it does not explain why victims remain silent. Remember I said that maybe only 20% reported cases to the police due to fear or stigma. So it does not explain why victims remain silent, how they cope, or the deeper cultural or psychological dynamics around the issue. You see? And so in that case, you now need qualitative approach to complement the quantitative approach. So the qualitative approach now will now explore experiences. It will now explore meanings and the coping strategies of these victims. In that case, the researcher now will conduct an in-depth interview. The data collection method is going to now apply will be the what? The qualitative, where he or she will conduct an in-depth interview with probably, what number do I use now? Probably 15 survivors of domestic violence, or 20 of them, and can even go to the extent of engaging them in focus group discussion. And in that case, when you carry out that study, what will be your findings? Your findings will not be in percentage. Your findings will now come under narratives. Survivors will do what? Describe their feelings. They will describe feelings of fear, feelings of shame, and probably economic dependence as reasons for not living abusive relationship. Did you get me? From the in-depth interview or the focus group discussion, they will be open. They will be very open to tell you, I'm still in this abusive relationship because of fear of, shame. Remember the case of Osinachi? Osinachi was in an abusive relationship. Remember that Christian gospel singer?
Yeah.
He remained, is somebody who is singing gospel, that's a born-again child of God and all that. I mean, it will sound abominable where you hear that she's divorced. True of us.
Ma. Yes, ma.
Yeah, so for me, I just take it that woman remained in that relationship out of shame. Can I be singing gospel song? And then
And I
people will
stayed
hear
in
that
my
I'm divorced. Some remain in abusive
Yes,
relationship
ma'am.
because there is this economic dependence. So you can't get this in-depth information if you just go on with quantitative study and not applying the qualitative approach. So social workers highlight systemic barriers such as weak enforcement of protective laws and lack of shelter. Their findings will reveal that. So the strength of qualitative in this kind of study is that it provides rich and contextual insight into the survivors' lived experiences. But the limitation we will have with this matter, this kind of thing, is that the sample size will be small. Sample size. Who is talking? Please mute your mic. Oh. The sample size will be small. That will be the limitation. The sample size will be small. Sample size means, small sample size means findings are not statistically generalizable to a wider population.
I want
That
to
is
ask a
always the
question, ma'am.
issue. Okay. Let me
Yeah.
get to the last one. Let me get to the last one before you ask. I've mentioned we are using this case. So now we want to apply the mixed method approach. That is where we want to complementary use of them. So when combined, both approaches will offer a fuller picture. It will offer a fuller picture. Quantitative data will show the scope. It will show the scope. That is what I mean by scope. It will show how widespread domestic violence is. That is what I mean by scope. Quantitative data will show the scope. That is how widespread domestic violence is and what types are most common. Why the qualitative will show the depth. When I mean the depth, why women stay in abusive relationship, what emotional and cultural factors that are involved. That is what qualitative data will give you. So applying it in our social work practice and policy, Policymakers will use the statistics. They will use the statistics to allocate fundings for shelter. Remember that quantitative data will show the scope, that is how widespread domestic violence is. So in that case, the policymakers will use these statistics they've gotten from quantitative to allocate fundings for shelter, fundings for counseling and awareness campaigns. Because if the scope is so wide, that is there's so much domestic violence in that community or in that state, I mean, it calls for awareness campaign. Then practitioners, you and I, we are the social workers, we can use the qualitative findings to design cultural sensitive interventions. That is where we come in. We can now use this qualitative information we have gotten, qualitative data we have gotten, findings, to design culturally sensitive interventions, such as what? Community dialogues and empowerment program for the women.
Yes.
Yes. If the women tell you that, in fact, I'm still in this relationship because if I come out of the relationship, nothing for me. Why I still in this relationship? Because I'm economically depending on my husband. You, the practitioner, what do? You come up with an empowerment program that will empower the women. So you see the usefulness of combining both quantitative and qualitative. So in summary, quantitative method will give you how many, how often, and what pattern. How many, how often, what pattern. That is what quantitative method will always, that is why we say it is numerical data.
And
That
frequency.
can, yes, and frequency, percentage, and those are how many, how often, what pattern, what is the pattern of the abuse? Is the pattern of the abuse, is it emotional abuse? Is it economic abuse? Is it, like that? But the qualitative will give you why. Why? So if your study is to find out why, you don't go for quantitative. But if your study is to find out how many, how often, what pattern, why, how, what does it mean, then you use the two. You use both of them. You are very, very free to. In fact, at this your level, you should use the two. So evidence that is both broad and deep guide your effective social work intervention. So you can ask your question. Or in course of my explanation, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, yes, I still want to ask the question. The question is, I want to ask, like you said, quantitative, you combine the two with qualitative, which makes it mixed method of data gathering. Now, like how many questions can we ask when we are mixing together? Like in quantitative, let's just say you say in a wide range of 250 questionnaires spread across the law. Now we are combining the two. Like, what is the standard of the mixed method? We can ask. Can we just ask 10 questions, or can we just ask say 50? What is the standard measurement? That's my question. Thank you.
There is no particular standard measure. If you want to make a generalization of your findings, and you in that case, you are going to use quantitative. And that quantitative, remember, you know what I mean by generalization of your findings? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
In
Yes,
that
ma'am.
case, you are going to use a large population. The number has to be more. Like I mentioned, 200, 300, 500 questionnaire you will develop. And then coming to the qualitative that you're going to add to it, that one will have its own separate question guide, interview guide. We call it interview guide. You prepare an interview guide that is open-ended. And then you will tell yourself that you are going to take as reasonable number that you can lay hands on that will agree for you to interview them, even if they have filled the questionnaire. And in that case, you can take 20, 30, as much as you can get. That's why I tell you that there's no standard. But you have to just bear in mind that for qualitative, your number is small. Quantitative, the number is large.
That means we are going to get the qualitative from the quantitative.
You can take people from there,
Questionnaire.
yes. Yes, you can take people from there.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, you can take people from there. If you don't also want to take people from there, you can also have another group outside the number that will fill your questionnaire. But the thing is that in course of your analysis, you are going in your chapter 3, you are going to be saying what you use. That you use mixed method, you use quantitative and qualitative and all that, and then you statistically analyze your questionnaire, and then you thematically analyze the qualitative. And that will now complement your results and make your work richer. Did I answer your question?
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Okay. We can also have another example like unemployment and youth violence. Unemployment and youth violence. You know, it's a study. Unemployment and youth violence.
Yes.
Yes.
It
One day.
comprises
Unemployment
quantitative
is dependent.
number of
Unemployment.
people unemployed and reason why they are not employed. So
Mhm.
both quantitative and qualitative will be applied, which is mixed method. Am I
Exactly.
online, man?
You are
Thank you,
correct.
man.
So
Thank you, man.
unemployment is an independent variable. Remember our variable. Unemployment is an independent variable. Why youth violence is what? Dependent variable. So in a quantitative study, you want to examine the link now, the link between unemployment and the youth involvement in violent activities. Can you see the two variables?
Or youth involvement in substance use.
No, we are using youth violence. That is
Okay, man.
Unemployment.
youth involvement in violent activities. So for the quantitative approach, you want to examine the link, the relationship. How is this one depending on this or not? And you can state an hypothesis with that. So your data collection method in this study will now be to administer questionnaire to the youths. Maybe let's say 800 youths in one of your local government area. Like my own local government area is Emolga in Rivers State. And I want to study unemployment and youth involvement in violent activities. And of course, it's very easy for me to get up to 600 youths in my local government area. And so when I give them a questionnaire, my question will be, in my questionnaire will contain employment status. It will contain the educational level. It will contain the involvement in violent groups. It will contain an income level. It will also contain frequency of arrest. These are the things that will be contained in my questionnaire. and that I will expect the 600 youths in my local government to fill. And at the end, I may come up with these results. Maybe 62% of unemployed reported engaging in violent activities. Maybe youths with secondary school education are more likely to be unemployed than those with vocational training. And maybe I may have a clear statistical correlation, emerging between long-term unemployment and gang membership. So, but because I want to use the two now, because I want to use both method, I bring in qualitative approach. And then when I bring in qualitative approach, what will I do? I will conduct a focus group discussion with unemployed youths, because this time I will purposefully go for the youths that are not employed. Remember that in the other one, I could spread my questionnaire to both the employed youths and non-employed youths. But this is for qualitative, I will purposefully select unemployed youths and do what with them, and I will interview them. When I interview them, I can also even interview community leaders in that community. Can involve the community leaders because they will have idea of what is happening in the community. And if that place has a police station, I can even go ahead to interview the law enforcement officers in that local government area, in that my local government area, all to have full.
You can also include parenting.
Yes, I can also pick some parents and interview.
Community, church, mosques, and social gatherings.
Okay. So, and from the qualitative, my findings will be that I could have findings that says that the youth describe feelings of frustration. Is it not possible? My qualitative can give me a finding that youth describe their feelings of frustration. They could describe their lack of opportunities.
Lack of infrastructure.
No, now why are you bringing infrastructure now? What has infrastructure got to do with the perception of the there will be what lack of opportunity. You see the youth, they will tell you that we don't even have opportunity. Before you know it, it's always man no man. Because we don't know anybody. That is why we are not taking. You can even get findings that would say that there is peer pressure as reason for their involvement in violent activities. So why are you involved in violence? It's not because I don't really have a job that is making me to be involved in violence, but the friends I have are into it. So I decided to join them. You can get such information. The community leaders, you can get information from the community leaders when you interview them, and they will highlight the lack of government investment in vocational training. Community leaders can tell you that in this our community, nothing is there. Government has not put up anything that our people will be employed, or even where we have companies, our youth are not taking. They bring people from outside. Community leaders will give you that information. What about information from police officers? Police officers can report that most violent incidents are linked to unemployed youth seeking quick income. So you will always get information when you engage in qualitative approach. So when you do that, it will give you insight into the psychological or the social, or even the structural drivers of youth violence. So Miss method is very good because quantitative data will confirm the scale of the problem, which is unemployment, strongly correlating with violence, while the qualitative data will explain the process and the meanings, that is youths seeking belonging or identity or surviving through gangs. So if you get all this information, all this data, how do you apply it? As a social worker, you can now advocate for vocational programs and community engagement strategies, while policymakers will push for what? Job creation. Hello, are you with me? So I want to ask one question now.
Yes, ma'am.
Listen to the question. Listen to the question. No. The question is this. In what situations could you prioritize qualitative methods over quantitative in social work research? In what situations would you prioritize qualitative methods over quantitative in social work research?
Yes, ma'am. Area of gathering of in-depth information concerning cultural, emotional, and any form of individual perception to live. Thank you.
Okay. So which means you are following. So when you want to
Thank
explore
you, ma'am.
explore sensitive and stigmatized issues, you use qualitative. You prioritize qualitative over what? Quantitative. When you want to explore sensitive or stigmatized issues, like when you are studying topics such as domestic violence, sexual abuse, HIV/AIDS stigma, or mental health, survivors or participants may not be willing to disclose full experiences through structured questionnaire. So you see why I said that today's lecture is very, very important, because you are going
Yes,
to
ma'am.
write a project. You are going to write a project, a thesis, or dissertation as the case may be. So do not go and everything questionnaire, quantitative. When you are studying, when you want to explore sensitive or sensitive issues or stigmatized issues. So qualitative interviews or focus group allows you for open discussion, allows you for trust building and capturing the depth of lived experience. And I gave example of conducting an in-depth interview with survivors of domestic violence to understand their coping strategies and barriers to seeking help. If you have such a study, you can't jump into quantitative, my friend. You go for qualitative because you want to conduct an in-depth interview with these survivors of domestic violence to understand their coping strategies and the barriers that are working against them from seeking help. So another situation where you use qualitative over quantitative, one I say when you're exploring sensitive issues. Another one is when you want to have understanding complex social phenomena. Understanding complex social phenomena. That is when the phenomenon is multifaceted, contextual, and not easily reducible to number. There are studies that you cannot reduce to number, like social work. Social work will often deal with processes like empowerment, resilience, community mobilization, that requires detailed
Emotion.
exploration. So in that case, you don't use quantitative. What of when you want to capture the lived experience of an individual? That is when the goal is to understand how individuals perceive and interpret and make sense of their experiences. Quantitative survey cannot fully capture that emotion. When you want to check people's emotional, psychological feelings over their issue, you can't go for quantitative, you go for qualitative. In that case, you use narrative interviews to understand how the individual feels about his situation. Then evaluating programs and interventions in context. Most of us, when we want to evaluate the programs we have put in place, you say you are using quantitative. You can't use quantitative when you want to evaluate programs and the interventions in context. For example, when assessing the impact, if you are assessing the impact of social work intervention beyond numerical outcomes, qualitative method can reveal participant experience, satisfaction, and unintended consequences. For example, use focus group discussion with women. Focus group discussion with women in a micro credit program. That's where you're doing women empowerment. You have done women empowerment where you had to give them microcredit, a loan and all that. You use qualitative. Engage the women in focus group discussion and discuss with them to evaluate how the microcredit program has helped them.
I think we will use mix. We know the
No,
number of women that
e-
need
even
such
you in
intervention,
that
and
they are not.
at the same time, knowing the in depth of what are the causes or what they need the money for. So I think it's mixed.
You can use me, but I'm
Sorry,
talking
ma.
of the situation. See, when you are using two methods, one will be more prioritized than the other.
Yes,
So
ma.
I'm
Yes.
asking a situation where you prioritize one more than
Okay.
you are using miss, you are free to use miss method, but one
Yes,
will
ma.
be more prioritized than the other. You prioritize one more than the other. The other one is just complementing. So in this case
Oh,
of
thank you, ma.
evaluating programs and intervention, the one that will be the main data collection method will be qualitative. Then this
Qualitative.
quantitative you have put now will just complement. Are you with me? You know what I mean by complementing?
Yes, ma. One is
Yeah.
let's say 80%, another one
Okay.
like 20% or 70
Okay.
30. The
So then what
complement one will
about
be 30 or 20.
okay situations where quantitative methods are prioritized over qualitative methods? Now I've turned it the other way. So can you tell me situations where quantitative is prioritized over qualitative, even if you want to use mixed method, but you are prioritizing quantitative over qualitative.
If you want to study the case of numbers of unemployment in a particular community, you can
Okay.
use quantitative,
Okay.
prioritize over qualitative
Okay,
as
when
a
you are
case study.
measuring, when you are measuring prevalence,
Yes,
and incidence,
yes.
prevalence and
Incident,
incidence of social
incident,
problem.
frequency, yes, frequency,
Mhm.
prevalence, and
Mm.
can use that. And the quantitative, qualitative is going to be kind of supplement to it.
Okay. So that is what I'm saying now. There is a situation where you are measuring prevalence and incidence of that social problem. So your objective will be to determine how widespread a
Number,
problem,
how widespread,
how widespread a problem is within a
how
population.
frequent, how frequent.
So the frequency now will now come into your
Frequency is
questionnaire.
different
Your
from
questionnaire now will have questions that have to provide numerical data. They will provide numerical data in frequency, provide numerical
Yes, ma'am.
data in patterns, and provide
Yes, ma'am.
numerical data in trends.
Yes,
That
ma'am.
is, take for instance, estimating the percentage of children experiencing neglect in urban slum in Port Harcourt.
Yeah. Yes.
Estimating the percentage of children. I'm using River State, Port Harcourt, because I'm from there and I'm talking from there. Estimating the percentage of children experiencing neglect in urban slum in Port Harcourt. In that case, you will need quantitative, prioritizing it over
Qualitative.
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 Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Then,
Yes,
if you
ma'am.
want to test hypothesis, if you want to test hypothesis, like if you set an hypothesis that girls are doing better than boys, that is a hypothesis, or there's no significant difference between girls' academic performance from that of boys' academic performance. You are testing a hypothesis. In that case, you are going to use what? Quantitative.
Qualitative. It's narrative.
Quantitative will be prioritized over qualitative. Like testing the hypothesis that unemployment is significantly associated with youth involvement in violent activities. Can you hear that?
Yes, ma'am.
Unemployment, when you want to test the hypothesis that states that unemployment is significantly associated with youth involvement in violent activities, you use quantitative, even if you are going to complement it qualitative. So if you have hypothesis that is stating like that, in fact, what I'm trying to say in essence that once you are testing hypothesis, just know that you are going to use quantitative, even though you are going to complement with qualitative, if you like. Another place too you can use it again is when you okay. I think we should stop here so we can summarize now. Is there any question? I want you to what key takeaway for you? Key takeaway for you now. And I say use qualitative methods when your research question asks about meanings, processes, and experiences. I say use qualitative method when your research question asks about meanings,
Number.
processes, and experiences. Use quantitative method when your research question asks about frequency, asks about
Number.
pattern, asks about relationship,
Percentage.
or when you want to measure outcomes. When you want to measure outcomes, you use quantitative. But in many cases, look at the word I use, I say in many cases, mixed methods give the most complete picture by combining the strengths of both of them. So let's end by taking a question that has to combine. Let me talk about prioritizing. Imagine you are studying child labor. Imagine you are studying child labor in urban markets. Child labor in urban markets. You know what I mean by child labor in urban markets?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Which
we know child
method,
labor.
which method will you prioritize and why? Will you combine both approaches?
Yes, ma. I will combine both approaches there. I will prioritize qualitative because it will give me deep insight into the feelings of the people involved. So I will use
Okay.
lived experience, to question them under qualitative.
Okay. So it all depends. It all depends on your goal, the goal of your study. If I were studying child labor in urban market, my choice of method will depend on the research objective. Your research objective will determine which method to prioritize over the other. So if the goal of my study is to measure, if the goal of my study, I hope you guys are listening to me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma.
Okay. If the goal,
Yes, ma'am.
if the aim of my study is to measure the extent of the problem, if the goal of my study is to measure the extent of the problem, what is the problem I'm talking about? Child labor in urban market. If the goal of my study is to measure the extent of the problem, and the extent of the problem I'm looking at now is how many children are working. That is how many children are doing this urban market work. Their age distribution, what are their ages? Hours worked, income level, and school attendance. I will prioritize quantitative method. Are you hearing me?
Yes,
Yes,
ma.
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
we'll
I will
prioritize
prioritize. I
quantitative,
will prioritize quantitative.
quantitative.
If my goal is to measure the extent of the problem, and this extent of the problem is where I'm looking at how many children are doing this child labor. What are their age distribution? How many hours are they doing this one? Are they school? Do they go to school? Do they drop out from school? That is the number. How many? How many are in school? How many are drop out?
Level of their education.
I will prioritize quantitative
There is
over
quantitative
qualitative.
over qualitative.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. So, for example, administering structural questionnaire to her school, that is what I will do there. But however, if my goal is to understand the lived experiences of these children that are doing this child, the lived experiences of children workers. That is, why are the children doing this market labor? The condition they face, how they perceive their future, and how the culture or the economic factor that has pushed them into
How?
it. I will do
Why?
what? I will prioritize qualitative
Qualitative.
over
Qualitative
quantitative.
over quantitative.
Because
The
what I'm
question
going to
why?
do,
How?
yes,
Why?
what I'm going to do is that I will conduct an in-depth interview with the children, with their parents, and market association leaders to capture their narratives. So you see,
Can we
so
include community leaders into that kind of
is it?
community leaders? Can we
No, we are talking
put
about
community
urban markets now. You can't go to
children?
community leaders. You will go to market association leaders now. What did they go
Oh,
find for
yes,
community?
yes, yes. You're right.
Hmm? Because the market
So,
association leaders will be the one that will tell you.
yes.
They will give information. So what I'm trying to say in essence, I'm ending the lecture. Don't think that any method is better than the other.
Okay.
The aim of your
Thank
study,
you, ma'am.
what you want to look out for will determine which method you will prioritize over the other. So you see how I've used this particular scenario to give you the two priorities. Studying child labor in urban markets. So you see, both of you can be studying the same thing, but you prioritize one method over the other, depending on what the aim of your study is. So on that note, I think I should end the class. Any question? And is the class interactive enough? Did you understand? If you don't understand, you are free to ask question.
Yes, ma, we do, ma. It's very interesting and impactful, especially the lived experience. I'm hearing for the first time.
Okay, what do you mean by lived experience?
Yes, ma.
Okay.
Thank you for the class, ma.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So you are assuring me now. You are assuring me that when you choose your topics for study,
research purpose,
you will know what to do. First of all, ask yourself, what is the aim of this my study? What is it that I am looking for? So that I will know which of the method I will prioritize over the other. If I'm going to use the two methods, which one will take priority over the other? Or do I use just one particular? Yeah, you can use only one. No? You can use only one. It's not compulsory that you must use the two. But most times in our study, we encourage that you use the two. But you should understand what you are looking for. And your research objective will determine which method you are going to use. And that is why I've taken the pains to explain quantitative research method, data collection method, and qualitative data collection method. So thank you very much. Talk to you again next Saturday.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so much,
Thank you so much.
I appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you for the impact.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye, ma.
Bye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eshema, thank you, ma.
Thank you.
Eshema.
Fine.